morning and welcome to Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, or What I Have Stolen from JNUC's Past. My name is Chad Lawson. Among other things, I am a Jamf engineer with Rocketman. My particular specialty is in automation and scripting. A couple things to know about me. I first encountered Jamf in 2009. I had just started with a member of the Apple Consultants Network, and my very first client was a school district managing everything through Jamf. One guy managing hundreds of computers, if not thousands, all through Jamf. He was nicknamed the man in the basement in those days because of his magical ability. One of the very first things he told my boss is that he wasn't prepared to teach me all of Jamf, that I needed to learn Jamf through on my own time, as it were. So I ended up being sent out to my first, what was then called CCA, now the 300 class, in 2010 in Boston. And Boston is a beautiful city. Absolutely loved it. It was February. It was cold and covered in snow. It was like Hoth. I kept expecting to see AT-ATs walking by. It was cold, but that really was an amazing moment. And then the very next year, I got the opportunity to attend my first JNUC in 2011. And that was, as it turns out, I would find out later, the second JNUC. It was the first one being done at the Guthrie Theater. That very first JNUC, I was in awe of everything I learned. It was just full of new ideas and concepts. And this now is my 10th JNUC. The only two that I've missed were that very first one in 2010 and that second year in 2012. We were dealing with some crisis at the office and I wasn't able to get away. But over the years, I've also become a Jamf integrator. And I have, as of this summer, performed over 200 jumpstarts. Now, that's not meant to be bragging rights as much as it is just to describe the fact that I have now, because I've been to, well, first let me ask you this. Let me ask the audience. Go ahead and take a moment, put into the chat, what was the first year that you attended JNUC? And how many JNUCs have you attended? I'm looking forward to seeing the sheer number of answers, anywhere from people being, if this is your first JNUC, give yourself a shout out. If you've been to every single one of them, give yourself a shout. In fact, give yourself a shout out if you're attending JNUC. That's really all you need. But also, because I know there's going to be a couple, if I performed your jumpstart, please take a moment and put into the chat some good takeaway, something that really helped you as going forward working with Jamf. Now, if that particular story that you're thinking of, that big moment happened to be the time that I laughed so hard I got Pepsi coming out of my nose, and you know who you are, or the time that I got the girl from Ipanema stuck in everyone's head, feel free to leave that out. I'm looking for something tangible, something you're actually able to use. A little bit about what the plan for today is. I'm going to highlight a number of different presentations, ones that have meant a lot to me, because what I thought was interesting is those first couple of years, every presentation I went to was a mind-blowing experience. I learned new things, new concepts, new skills that I never had before. But over the years, I started noticing I was taking fewer notes. And I was following the rule of 2 feet and getting up and walking out of one presentation to go to another, because I wasn't having that awe-inspiring moment that I was anticipating. And I remember talking to somebody about it a couple of years ago. I think it was at 2019, for those of you who are there, the very first day, it was gorgeous and sunny. Then it became a little bit rainy. And by the end, it was snow. Somewhere I've got a photo of somebody drawing JNUC 2019 on one of the little barriers outside the hotel in the snow. And I remember talking to somebody at that JNUC and saying that I hadn't really had those awe-inspiring moments that I used to have. And their note was, well, you know, you've been doing this for like 10 years now, right? I mean, you've been doing this, being with Jamf. You've taught classes. You've developed scripts. This is nature to you. Of course, you're not having those moments. Why don't you step up and start providing those same moments for others? And I started thinking about what were those greatest hits? What were those moments that I've taken away from JNUC's past that I have used in my everyday experience, those things that have helped me help my clients, both through trainings and through professional services, to be able to succeed and move forward. And then what have I taken and pushed? And I don't want to say I've made them better, right? I just want to say that I've added a little bit more of myself to it. For some people, that's going to be good. For some people, that's going to be bad. And I know some of you are already making comments much to that point. So for each of these, I've got 4 that I want to highlight today over the years. I want to talk about what it is that I learned. What were those eureka moments, those things that I really said, this is my big takeaway. This was my return on investment. And not just in terms of the tech or the tools, but what were those philosophies that I took away from it? And speaking of which, I was thinking about this story the other day. In college, I had a philosophy class. It was a brief, ill-advised minor. And my teacher, as he would lecture, he had a very dry sense of humor. He would walk around the room, and whenever he got caught up in one of his own, amazed at his own brilliance, he would just go, pearls of wisdom, he referred to them. These moments of having that grit, that thing that got stuck in your head that oysters would then encase with that to become a pearl. And so he would just stop himself mid-lecture and go, pearl, write that down. And he would have us make a note of that particular burst of wisdom and draw a little pearl next to it. And so every time I have one of those pop moments in my head, they become a pearl of wisdom. And I hope I can share some of those to you, though I will attempt to restrain myself from making that gesture going forward. Now, I do want to bring out a few disclaimers here. One of the people I'll be referencing is Bill Smith, aka Talking Moose. And in his presentation, he references the idea of that they're not best practices, they're better practices. And same here. I know that not everything I talk about is going to work in every environment. If I give you something that is amazing for enterprise, it may not work in a K through 12 type of environment. Different skills are needed for different environments. And I also need to say that if you've seen me present before, or if you've worked with me in the past, you know that I love coding and automation. And I had to really tone it down to fit within the context of a JNUC. This particular presentation is going to be fairly light on code and heavier on the whys and the philosophies. Now, having said that, I have a lot of great resources. If you've been to one of my JNUCs, I've probably given you one of my link dumps that are just getting extremely longer, full of those favorite pearls across the years. I will have at the end a QR code and a link to a set of those particular resources. Remember, please, if you've been around IT for more than 6 months, don't try things in production, right? I'm going to strongly encourage you to, as we go through things, don't assume they're going to work right off the bat. Just because it works for me and just because it works for my clients, you're going to need to potentially tweak and test any one of these things in your environment. Now, on to our first giant. My very first JNUC. In fact, I think Andrea Kelly's presentation was I think it was toward the end of the day. So it probably wouldn't have been one of the first presentations I saw, but it was the first one that really stuck in my mind. Not just because of the content, and we'll get to some of the content, but really what made it shine for me was the style and the way she presented it. It really brought all of those things home. It helped me remember them. It grounded them all for me to use. So if you haven't seen the presentation, please go ahead and make a note of the URL down below. All 4 of these, I am linking directly to the YouTube video. 2 of them, Andrina's presentation, for example, existed before they put all of them on JNUC, on Jamf Nation. So that one doesn't exist there. And one of the other ones, the link and the video are broken. So I'm linking directly to the YouTube videos. But please check out the rest of the resources that they have on Jamf as well. Now, a couple of things. When Andrina did her presentation, one of her very first things that she presented on was this idea of having this machine checkup, or what does she call it? Machine checkup. And like I said, her presentation style was really what cinched it. But through all of them, there was a recurring theme, not just the particular technique that she had for presenting, but it was all about taking these redundant tasks, not redundant, repetitive tasks, these things that kept coming up, that she'd get the calls from over and over again at the worst times. And how could she put those into self-service and empower her people to be able to take control of their machine? And that was the awe-inspiring moment for me on that one. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got two great particular pieces of tech I want to show off. But for me, it was the idea of using self-service, because self-service has elevated privileges for environments where we need to be more secure. We can keep our users as standard users, and I hate using the term users, so from now on I'm going to go back to using people, all right? We can have our people remain as standard accounts and let them elevate themselves through self-service, either literally promoting themselves temporarily, which we'll cover, or just by using these tools there. And also giving self-service the power to help. And the big takeaway that didn't happen right away, it clicked in the more I started using these tools, both in my day job and in teaching others, was the idea that I don't have to be the one in control all the time. As in IT, we always want to control it. We want to lock it down because we have a responsibility to protect this tech. But by keeping that control, we're keeping our people from being able to really use it. This suddenly becomes that burden they have to use. And if you've ever encountered somebody that takes pride in the fact that they are not tech savvy, this gives them the chance. It's a little button that they can push to do a lot and take back control, and suddenly this becomes a tool to use rather than a hindrance. Now, the first particular piece of tech, though, that she showed up was called the machine checkup. If you see in the presentation, essentially think about in policies, and this was the slide that I have here is from my newer version. In hers, it was using an older version of the UI. For those of you who haven't been around Jamf since like 2015, since before then, it will look completely different. But in a policy, if you go down to the maintenance tab, there's all those different checkboxes. And in those days, we had things like fixed disk permissions and flushing caches, some of which have been deprecated over time. And all her tool did was check off those little boxes. That's all it needed to do. But it gave her people a chance to start fixing their tech and coming back. Now, I've done a couple other things, and what you see here is just the particular look of it. Two main changes, or three, I should say. One is that I am, at the end of it, triggering a restart. Why? Because if one of the biggest things that we find, each of these little checkboxes fix 1, 2, maybe 3% of computer problems. But turning it off and back on again fixes 80% of computer problems. So if I can get them to try this for me, then I can fix most computer problems right there. And if you ask somebody to restart on their own, they're probably going to say, I did it, either because they're just lying and they didn't want to deal with it, or they thought just closing the lid at night was the same thing. But the other thing is, and we're going to have a little bit more discussion on software updates and handling that. But the main reason people don't run software updates, in my experience, is because it's going to require them to restart, and they didn't want to do that. So if I'm already getting them to restart, if I'm already getting them to think about fixing their computer with a reboot, I might as well go ahead and install any available software updates. And the other one, I'm keeping an eye on the time. I will have in my notes, I'll add the story of the why I have it set to once every day. I didn't want somebody pushing it 20 times a day. If they needed it more than once, they needed to come to me. The other thing that I did is, Andrina hit it right on the nail on the head of using something and putting it in self-service with a nice icon and some nice text to let them know. I have the checkbox set that they have to view the description. And I'm using, I didn't know this until a few years ago, that the self-service descriptive text allows you to use Markdown. So you can use an asterisk on either side of words to put it in italics. 2, we'll put it into bold. 3, we'll do both. And there are other ones. These are just the ones that I use all the time. So I'm emphasizing, I want to make sure that nobody clicks on this without knowing this is going to restart their computer. I don't want anybody coming back at me and finding out that they lost work because they didn't know. And much like Andrina, I have found that using that basic troubleshooting tool, if you've done one of my jumpstarts, that is the very second policy that we create. It's the right after doing a basic installation, I do basic troubleshooting because it is such a powerful tool to empower and to control. The second one she provided was called Make Me an Admin, or hers was Make Me Admin. And it's the idea of if, for whatever security reasons, you have to have everyone as standard accounts, there are so many things that people need elevated privileges for. So I took hers and I took it back home because we had an issue. We had a manufacturing lab. And in the QA lab, people had one shared printer. And anytime that printer ran out of paper, the printer would pause. And the only way to unpause the printer was to log in as an admin from the printer that was the computer that was sharing it and unpause it. I couldn't do it from nobody could do it from any of the other computers. After my third time, I think, of putting on a Tyvek suit and having to go in just to log in with admin credentials, there has to be a better way. So I deployed Andrina's Make Me Admin so that people could just go ahead and click a button. It would pop up, and my version popped up an AppleScript dialog to say, hers used a web form. I like it, but I didn't have the savvy at that time to do it. But have them type in why they needed it. And if all I saw was printer as the description, I knew what that was for. Since then, I have learned how I can use security commands and the LP admin group to give everyone access to the printers without having to give everyone full admin privileges. So I don't use Make Me Admin as much. Mine is now called Make Me an Admin. And it borrows heavily, steals heavily from one you can find on Jamf's GitHub right now. I'm emphasizing here a couple of my particular changes. First, the code that is online, there are 3 different places you have to update how long this takes effect. One is done in seconds, one is done in minutes, and then one is done as like M for minutes. So I have a block of code that takes in a parameter, and I do all the calculations along the way. So you only have to change it in one place. And I can change it for different instances within of use of the policy. Second, I didn't want to scope this to individuals or have it available to everybody. And I should say a number of my customers that we deploy this with don't want this to be available for everyone. They only want it if they ask for it. So I have code in here that allows for, you can scope this policy to one or more static groups, depending on other parameters. And at the end of it, if you give it the right information, it will then use an API call to remove the person from that static group once it's promoted them to admin. So that way they can't push the button again and again. And you don't have to remember, I don't have to remember to keep going up and cleaning up that static group. The other thing that I added at the very end, because if you've ever been in system preferences and had the user field open and you click Make Me an Admin, it still shows you as being standard. And I got sick of the call saying, well, it didn't work. Yes, it did. No, it didn't. I'm looking right at it. It said, quit it and come back in. And by then it says standard again because it's been more than a minute. So I have a block of code down at the bottom that just simply verifies that they are in fact in there, and it dumps it into the Jamf policy log. So that way, if there's any question, help desk can look at it and say, nope, I verified you are an admin. Go. My particular little screen for it, again, I wanted to have a little bit of additional text. I couldn't resist. So I've got the Justice League. This was one of my favorite vinyl backings I saw on a laptop back in the day. So it says it'll grant you admin rights. It only lasts for 5 minutes was my example. With great power comes responsibility. I loved having Marvel and DC in the same thing. And I'm logging this. I wanted people to know that I haven't had an issue yet, knock wood, that people were abusing this, but I wanted them just as that cautionary tale that this information is being checked so people don't abuse the power. The next one of the giants I wanted to cover was from 2014, the very next year. Add pop and practicality with a clean user interface. This particular presentation didn't have as much tech for me as I wanted, but what I really loved were some of the philosophies. He used this acronym, there is more than one way to do it. And he used the phrase more than one way to skin a cat. I would add to it, though, as he went through a number of the different tools we have, from Jamf Helper, AppleScript, Python, for creating some sort of GUI to interact with our people. The different technologies, some of which no longer exist anymore, Cocoa Dialog, for example. But he also pointed out that not every tool is going to work on every single computer. For example, I've been learning Python lately. I've been a shell scripter since 1990. That's when I first started, and my code's not great, but it does the job. But lately, I've been playing around more with Python. But my issue with using Python for a GUI is that Apple still ships Python 2 on all of the computers. So I don't want to keep maintaining Python 2 code in those places where there's conflict. So it's the other philosophy I will put out there is the right tool for the right job. I tend to refer to it, I love the joke, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. And I have whacked at way too many bolts and machine screws when I should have been using a different tool than the hammer I had in my hand. But the place that this really came in handy, because not every single one of these is about having something that our people see, but what about having an interface that we can see? I recently did a series of onboarding workshops with one of our clients, where we had, I think, 10 different workshops of having people enroll their computers. And we created this entire onboarding workflow using Dep Notify. And that's another example of a more modern tool that at least wasn't highlighted in this presentation if it existed at that point. But it's another great tool for being able to create an interface in the context of onboarding. It may not be the best tool for all cases, but for onboarding, it is an amazing tool. And so while the people are watching this status screen, I didn't want, they had me put in step 1 of 10, even though there's a progress bar, they wanted exact numbers. I didn't want everybody just constantly saying, I'm on step 4, I'm stuck on step 3. I wanted a way that I could assure them I was monitoring it. So using webhooks embedded in Jamf and some additional tools like Airtable, I was able to set up my own little console that I could have on my second monitor, and I could watch every computer as it began through the process and showed me which step they were on. So I could, almost like a race car newscaster, tell people, all right, I see Tom is on step 8 moving forward. Okay, Sue has just moved into step number 11 and will be prompted for this. And I was able to assure them that I could see things were going and check in with people that were stuck. Because you can imagine having a dozen people all with their microphones on in a Microsoft Teams, all trying to shout where they're at and asking questions. This way I could keep the chatter down to actual questions and concerns. The next presentation that I wanted to highlight, my next giant, is Bill Smith, aka Talking Moose. Bill actually has 2 slots on my top 10 presentations. Today I'm going to talk about his first one, moving beyond once per computer workflows. This is much more about the philosophies than the technology. This is also where I got the idea of these are better practices, not best practices. He also says the idea of he wants people to develop an opinion, but be prepared to back it up. So Bill, I've got a couple coming for you. He talked about the idea of focusing on naming and taxonomy. And that is something that I've embraced and we have refined in our work at Rocketman on how we document and manage all of our stuff so that we can keep track of it over time. Because if you've ever run into the situation where you put up a script or you put up a package and it's 3 months later and you're looking at it and there's no longer a history down at the bottom. You click on it and there's nothing because the log flushing wiped it out weeks ago. Please make sure that you document for every package, for every configuration profile, for everything that you have a descriptive text for. And please take a moment and find the feature request so that we can get a comment or description box for policies. Document everything so that you know if you work in a team, spare the people that are going to be trying to fix your stuff 6 months from now. Even if you're working on your own, please remember the most important person on your team, the you, 3 months from now and 1 day after that log flushes. And also, I liked in his presentation the idea of moving from tasks to management, about creating workflows rather than just doing day-to-day jobs. It's about developing Jamf as a way, and this has been an amazing thing for me to change that mindset. Now, two opinions I have for Bill. First is he talked about the idea of naming and taxonomy. At Rocket Man, we use all of our groups start with either S: or M:, and I've heard all the S&M jokes you ever want to hear. Please don't bother putting them in the chat. But that way, we know when we're looking at a group, what is this for? We have a script that we run routinely for all of our clients, a little health check, to find out which packages have been abandoned over time, which groups are no longer being used, which extension attributes are no longer in use. And for a number of these things, once they become orphaned, once they're no longer being deployed, we want to be ready to deprecate them and eventually get rid of them. But groups are a little trickier because we keep groups around to be able to keep an eye on what's going on. And I don't want to delete a group that was being used to watch for stuff. So by having it as S:, if I have an S:, that is an orphaned group, I know it's time to deprecate or delete it. If it says M:, I leave it because it might just be pinned to somebody's dashboard. And speaking of which, here's the other place that I have a different opinion from Bill. Bill suggested having all of your groups and all of your policies working toward the bright side of life, as I put it. If you're creating a policy that is intended to install a particular application on everyone's computer, then scope it to all computers, but exclude the ones that already have it. Focus on getting it out to everybody. And as such, he didn't like using groups, smart groups, that looked for needs file vault, because you want to be building up toward where everybody has file vault. But because I do a lot of monitoring groups, I have a number of groups that I keep pinned in my dashboard. M: needs lost sheep. And if you've ever done one of my jumpstarts, I love coming back and finding, working at Rocket Man with a jumpstart I helped years ago and finding lost sheep. It's still the first smart group I ever create with a client of looking for which computers haven't been checking in. I now put the M: next to it, but I look for everything that is wrong, and those are the ones I pin to my dashboard. So when I log in, I hope to see what you see here. A row of little zeros. Any non-zero number, I click on and see what's wrong. And the last one I wanted to cover is Dan Hoffman's presentation from 2018 using reverse extension attributes. What I absolutely loved about this, I want to keep the QR code up here for just 1 second longer for those of you trying to grab it. What I loved about his presentation, there was some fantastic tech that I want to cover. But the other reason I really remember his presentation is working for Pixar. He was able to use a lot of imagery without getting in any trouble. But the concept, and he even admitted early on in the presentation, it's less about reverse extension attributes. He's not sending information anywhere. He's keeping it local. But local extension attributes didn't have a nice flair. But it's the idea of using a plist file, and in a script you can just do a defaults read or a defaults write to store information about a particular need. The other thing he talked about was puppy time, a concept they used to have at Pixar. While people were waiting for software updates to load, it would be showing pictures of puppies from members of the staff. I have implemented that in places, and even now you can still do it. And I don't know if he had played with dep notify before, but that's another place where you can use that, because you can use the images command to load up into that screen. I have a new version of puppy time. Dan, if you want it, please let's talk. For those of you who are interested, it will be in our notes later. But it was also this idea of using this technology you can guide a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. In his presentation, he showed having a policy that ran once a week for anybody with available software updates. And it would just show a different character, a different Pixar character based on, hooray, you have software updates, or you need to install software, or just you haven't installed your updates. The script remained the same. And he didn't bother storing in Jamf through the API. He didn't bother storing how many times they'd skipped it. He kept that information local using a defaults write command. Now, and that's great, because then he could have his script react based on how many times that they had skipped it. But the question that I've then run into is, well, then how do you get that information into Jamf? I love API scripting, but we've run into some issues where in dealing with keeping confidential information like a rotating backdoor admin password, needing to submit that information up to an API call. What happens if that's the moment somebody's internet connection goes wrong? I've just changed a password for a backdoor admin account and I sent it to Jamf and it never got there. What am I going to do next time? So I can store that information encrypted locally using all the different techniques that are out there, encrypted strings or whatever you like. I can store that information locally. And that way, if it doesn't get into Jamf, if Jamf finds that information is missing or stale, a later recon can come along with the extension attribute. This is just a template of it, but you can see the idea of looking to see if a particular file exists. And if it does, pulling the information that you want out and putting that in there. So now I'm storing it locally and I'm storing it in Jamf Cloud so that I have it in all the places I could possibly need it. But what I really liked about his particular presentation, it wasn't about, don't get me wrong, this is great tech, but it was about the idea of using an interface, using information that the computer knows about itself to be able to interact with your people. And see, I did user again. Interact with your people and give them control. And if that should be the philosophy you've heard over and over again, and it has empowered me to empower others to make my life easier and to make their life easier and to make everybody's life easier. Now, as I promised, I do have, here is my QR code and my links. I have a pretty decent write-up of everything we've talked about here. A couple things I just didn't have the time for, and I've already run over. So for those of you staying behind, thank you very much. And with that, I will turn things over.